The idea today is talk a little bit about conflict management and violent communication. Why did we decide to talk about this on a diversity event? I think a little bit it's to show you a different side of Bain, right? So you usually go to these diversity events, the companies talk a lot about themselves and stuff, and we are trying to show here a different initiative that we are piloting within BigLad, which is these types of trainings to help people develop certain skills, right? That might be useful for their careers, and they might have a specific applications if they are part of an underrepresented minority, for example. And throughout the presentation, I'm going to explain a little bit why we think conflict management is a relevant theme for underrepresented groups. The idea here today is talk a little bit about diversity at Bain, right? I think some of you were already in a session about it, so we are not going to spend too much time on it. But the idea is to give you also an opportunity to ask some questions if you have them. And then we are going to jump start into the conflict management and the violent communication part. The goal here today is obviously to talk a little bit about Bain, so you can get to know us a little bit more. This is also an open space to share ideas on development and applications of conflict management skills. And this is an opportunity to share and learn from others' experiences. So these sessions, when we run them inside of Bain, are usually pretty interactive. So if you can share your perspectives or experiences, that would be absolutely fantastic. But at the same time, we obviously understand that you might not want to share them, or those might be sensitive. So you can totally share how much you want and how much you feel comfortable sharing. And what this is not a comprehensive material on how to solve all discrimination in the workplace, of course. And this is not also telling you, this is not about telling you how to react to conflict. My perspective here is very limited. As a white cisgender man, I understand I cannot have all perspectives that you can bring to the table. So the idea is that you participate, and I'm going to focus on more on the theory, right? So talking a little bit about diversity at Bain, as you probably know, Bain really values diversity and inclusion. Our vision is the following, right? So create the truly extraordinary teams required to generate breakthrough results. This is kind of part of our mission. By assembling the most diverse set of experiences, backgrounds, strengths, and perspectives, and being the best at bringing this diversity together in ways that others cannot. So here we are talking about two big ideas, right? Diversity and inclusion. We are also talking a little bit about equity, which I believe is the next step on this journey, right? Which is kind of like changing the processes, the internal the internal culture, so people with diverse backgrounds and diverse experiences and perspectives can have a share of voice as well. So we obviously understand that diversity and inclusion are only part of this big journey we all have to travel. And we are very much, we consider we are very much successful in traveling this journey, right? Three big components of this are our affinity groups, as we call them: Women at Bain, Be Glad, and Blacks at Bain. These are the main groups at South America. At Bain Global, you have other groups that are kind of responsible for bringing together specific minority groups. In South America, these three groups bring together 317 people, which is a lot of people. It's almost half the people in the South America offices. So we are very much proud of them. And now we are going to talk a little bit about each of these groups, right? So starting with Women at Bain, Carolina is here, or Anna, Daniela is here. Hey, Daniela, how are you?
Hello, everybody. How are you?
Pretty good.
Great
Do you
to
wanna?
be here. Yes, I can do it. This page. So great to be here with you tonight. Some of you I have already talked in one of the sessions previously. I recognize some names here. So I'm just gonna quick introduce you to the program of our women at Bain. And basically we are working currently around 5 pillars. So the first one is recruiting. So as you imagine, it is hard for us to attract female for our business for several reasons. And we try to mitigate a little bit all the bias in our recruiting that we have, since from the GMAT perspective, but also asking or trying to train these women in what consultant could be if they join our firm. So we work very hard in the AC recruiting, proposing alternative events, explain the career, and try to present effectively the challenges that we face here at Bain, and demonstrating that women can perfectly thrive and succeed in this career. But it's not only about recruiting. It's not only about attract talented people. We need to retain them. And here we have other pillars that we work. The first one is culture, training, and events. So we have this Women at Bain group, and over the course of the year, we try to create different events that to connect our group, not only the women, of course, but also what we call the ally people, so we can bond and we can create the culture of diversity, and really help and know each other better, and really create this environment to succeed, not only in terms of event, but also in terms of training. As you can imagine, we face some challenges as women. So typically it's a male environment. So we receive a lot of training of how to present in a male environment, how to connect with clients in this type of environment. So there is a lot of trainings that are more specific for our group. It's open for everybody, but we try to make sure that we work in all the pain points that we have during the career. The third, I'm not going to go to the third pillar now. I'm going to talk about the flex models and career paths. So one of the main challenges for women, and we typically catalyze this discussion, it's not, again, only for women, but typically we work more about, or at least we talk more about our expectations of balance between our private life and our career. So we try to lead the discussions about the flex model and different kinds of career path, like take internal roles, or LOA, that is a leave of absence, take a period off. And we of course don't design all these policies for our group only. It's for the entire office that are available, but typically we raise our voice here and try to lead the discussion and catalyze the change here. About talent management, we have a group of women in our program that really follows the other women of our company. So we have our sponsorship program and other initiatives around it that are really help these women to thrive in their career. So we again raise our voice to help them, to make sure that they get the right staff, that they can develop, they have the right opportunities to succeed and to stay with us. This is our pillars for retention. And the last one that is in the middle, in fact, that is share of voice. We truly believe that our role as a top consulting firm is really to change the standards of the industry, but not only in the way we do business, but also the way we build a better world. So we want to have a high share of voice in terms of diversity discussions, and help our clients that are facing the same kind of discussion in their companies to manage good policies, good practices, to retain their talents, and to build a more fair career path for everybody. So here we typically have several IPs around the world and specifically for South America. And we write these articles and these studies, and we do host some events to make people know about them and to really engage in the discussion and make sure that Bain has a clear position on this, and the industry and the C-level knows about it. So this are pretty much what we are doing in our Riemann program currently.
Cool. Thank you, Daniela. We are going to open up for questions in a second. But now I would like to talk a little bit about BigLad, right? So BigLad's mission is to support recruitment and retention of top LGBTQ talent, right? I forgot to say it, but I'm also on L1 at BigLad, which means I'm open to everyone at Bain about my sexuality. BigLad South America is involved in a bunch of different initiatives in recruiting, for example. So we also have specific recruiting resources for LGBTQ applicants. So we participate on specific events that target them. For example, for our membership, we have activities that kind of like foster this sense of belonging, right? Which is again kind of this part of this journey of diversity and inclusion. So we gather in informal events. We participate on a global BigLad summit once a year, so this is pretty cool as well. We develop tools and skills to help us succeed, and this training you're going to see today is part of that. We have highly visible and accessible events. This is for membership, but also for allyship, right? To build the culture inside Bain. So we celebrate big days for the LGBTQ community as well. So we do have trainings for allies. We work on systematic change as well, aligning with leadership, reviewing policies regarding, I don't know, healthcare for partners, for example. We run a diversity census, which we are kind of like calculating the results right now. And we also engage with broader society, right? So we, for example, have a program where we train and provide mentoring for big NGOs that work in LGBTQ rights here in Brazil. And because of all of those things and much and other initiatives that happen on BigLad on a global scale, we've been having pretty good results recently. So in terms of inclusive community, for example, we increased from 85% to 91% the number of people who think who agree with the fact that we have a strong and inclusive community. In terms of supportive for all identities, we increased it from 71% to 81%. So this is pretty cool. And in terms of people who are completely out in their lives, we increased it from 65 to 70%. And in terms of people who are more out at work, and that means Bain is creating an environment that allows these people to be more out there than they are in their personal lives. So we increased it from 11 to 13% in the last 2 years. So these are all pretty good results. We are very proud of them. And we are also increasing the diversity inside the global BigLad, right? Which is something we are very proud of as well. So we're decreasing the number of gay people and increasing the number of other sexual identities or sexual orientations, which is pretty cool, right? Diversity within diversity. So it's pretty cool. The people who participate on Blacks at Bain were not able to be here today, but this is very important. I would like to talk a little bit about it. So this is a newer group, sort of, in Brazil. We are mainly focused on recruiting, and we are developing a program for mentoring Black candidates in university who are in the university to be able to perform better at the Bain's recruiting process. We also host events for Black candidates, and we promote we promote discussions about diversity with the leadership. And because of the recent events, we have also developed on a global level. I mean, the Bain world kind of came up with these 7 big commitments to help improve racial diversity, which we understand is sort of something that we have to work on. So commit $100 million in pro bono support globally for the next 5 years. Formally establish racial and social equity as the 4th pillar in our social impact practice. Match up 1 million in employee donations. Work with clients to develop this agenda. Tomorrow we are going to have a full day of reflection with all of the offices in the world dedicated to discussing the matters of racial and racial equity within the company. We are going to be more aggressive in our agenda, launching programs to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, committing collective to diversifying leadership, for example, and educating our employees. So this is a very serious topic. We are very much focused on it. And overall, we are pretty much working on all of those fronts, right? And the results we've been getting kind of position us to get pretty good recognition in several different metrics across the industry. So yeah, Bain is working very hard on helping these underrepresented groups thrive and be successful within Bain, outside of Bain. But we clearly understand that these groups face a bunch of challenges, right? So harassment and discrimination, for example, is one of those challenges. Challenges in their careers, unequal pay, negative behaviors and stereotypes. So here's a bunch of different stats, right? Based on research, based on different news. So for example, 76% of Black people face discrimination regularly or sometimes in the workplace, compared to 81% if these people have a college degree. So it actually increases when they are more educated. 37% of women had been treated as less competent in a setting with more men than women. And when you compare this with a different setting, a setting with more women than men, only 20% of women report the same treatment. So you can clearly detect a problem here. Black people also report that their careers didn't meet their expectations, 60% compared to 30% for white people. Managers, and this is a research that shows that managers usually give higher performance ratings to people who have the same gender as them. This is another example of unconscious bias, maybe discrimination. We have to think about this. Only 13% of Brazilian companies have female CEOs, for example. Another example of how careers for different groups might be harshly impacted, right? Unequal pay, we all know there's this wage gap between women and men, between Black people and white people. And this also, all of those questions kind of like present themselves in forms, in kind of like more abstract forms, right? Negative behaviors, stereotypes that kind of affect these people. For Big Lead specifically, I brought a couple of stats here. So 68% of people in Brazil have witnessed or heard of homophobia in their workplace. So it's a very high number, right? 33% of companies wouldn't hire someone for someone who is LGBTQ for a leadership role. So again, very, very troubling numbers. And LGBTQ people obviously face challenges, right, because of all of this. So here are some quotes. I'm tired of hearing things that are said to be jokes, but are actually disguised discrimination. So I guess all of us here kind of like have faced this before, right? A colleague said they were disgusted to work with a homosexual. Again, sort of a comment that people might end up hearing. Third comment here, a colleague said that if he saw two boys kissing, I'm sorry, a colleague said that he saw two boys kissing on the subway over the weekend and that he wanted to have a gun so he could shoot these people. The person who actually heard the sentence was me. So it was very hard at the time. I'm sure some of you have faced similar situations in your work environments. So the idea here is that people in underrepresented groups might end up needing tools that other people might not need that much, right? So that's why we decided to talk about um, conflict management. And when all of those types of situations occur, right, you obviously have a number of different resources to reach out to, company-wide resources. For example, in case of Bain, you could talk to the real leadership who's well-trained to address all of those issues. You could talk to HR and look for policies that address your specific concerns. Or you have the affinity groups, right, who might help you in the situations. You have friends, family, allies, and other people who might help you make sense of the situation and advise you on how to deal with it. You may have the techniques to handle conflict, which are the techniques we are going to talk about today. And you obviously have the law, depending on the country, right? Here are some resources for Brazil. I'm sorry, the presentation is very much Brazil focused. The rest is not that much, but it's just because we used it internally in Big Lab Brazil. So today we're going to talk about conflict management and nonviolent communication. Hopefully you're not going to need this because you will have the other resources on the left, right? But if you do need those, I hope you can make good use of what we're going to talk about today. So just to start, a quick example here, thinking about a potential conflict, right? So imagine you're in a job interview and you really want this job, you really need this job, whatever. The interviewer makes a racist, transphobic, or sexist joke. Tough situation. I'm not sure if any of you had to deal with this before. But before you react to it, what are the factors, and this is an open question to all of you, use the chat if you want, or just speak up. What are the factors that kind of impact your decision to react to that comment? I'm going to start with one, just an example. Timing, for example, right? You might decide to react at the moment or after you got the offer. Timing impacts, timing might impact, for example. What are other factors? Well, there's a bunch here. I don't know if you agree with them. Again, feel free to use the chat whenever you want to participate. So level of aggression, for example, right? How heavy was the comment? Was it a serious comment, a light comment? Context matters as well, right? How many people were in the room? Were you alone? Was this virtual or in a physical space? Were you the only available candidate? If you're the only one, you might be able to kind of like confront the interviewer. How much you actually want this job is another context that matters. Is what is the culture, right? Is this a company that supports diversity? A company doesn't. Which industry, which country is this? Repercussions, right? What are the costs? Your image, reinforcing the stereotype that sometimes might be a worry, right? I'm not gonna fight because that might reinforce some stereotype that my group might have. Gains, what you're gonna gain from it: learning, respect. Target, was it directed to someone or to you? Intention, what was the intention behind the comment? Was it an evil comment, or was it based on an education, for example? Relationships, mood and readiness, how ready were you to react at that moment? And openness, right? How open the other person seems to feedback or to disagreement at that moment. So all of those factors kind of impact our decision to react. And conflict management techniques kind of help us juggle all these factors to deal with conflict the best way possible. And the idea here is obviously not eliminating conflict, not avoiding conflict, but dealing with it in a productive way, in an optimistic way, that kind of improve the positive aspects of it, learning, group development, for example, and decrease the negative aspects of conflict: fighting, sadness, anger, waste of time, regret. Oh, I said something I shouldn't, for example. There are 4 pillars that kind of based that kind of like base the conflict management techniques. Oops, sorry. The first one is communication, right? Having a simple, clear, and accurate communication to avoid misunderstandings. And we end up seeing a major source of conflict, of unproductive conflict, is usually communication, right? Emotional intelligence, that's a very important factor as well. So developing ability to understand your own feelings and those of others, and to handle those feelings well, right? So how you handle feelings that kind of appear in the conflict. The third one is empathy and otherness. And empathy is a concept you all have heard about, I'm sure. This is basically seeing the situation from other people's point of view, right? This other concept here, otherness, which in Portuguese is called alteridade. This is basically understanding that your empathy might have limitations, right? So not every single time you're going to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes. So the idea here is to actually understand that people are different, and sometimes you will not understand why they behave the way they behave. And the fourth pillar here is creative problem solving, right? So conflict appears as a problem, as a problem sometimes that we kind of have to solve and be creative and think about workable solutions for it. And how to operationalize, right? Each one of these pillars here. We are going to deep dive into some of these topics, but the idea of communication here is try to be a more active listener, for example. These are more practical tips, right? Use I feel statements. You know, I feel sad. I feel bad when you say something like this. I feel humiliated. I feel not respected. So all of those I feel plus a feeling are shown to have a really productive impact on conflict. And reaffirming to others what you're hearing, right? So the person who actually said I should put this here was a woman. Actually, she said, "Oh, Lucas, I heard once that women are sometimes perceived as not being able to understand things. So for women to repeat what men are saying to them has an actually a good impact on conflict as well." So again, this is kind of like um, something someone told me, but it's shown to have a good response as well. So emotional intelligence, asserting your own emotions, right? Identifying triggers, yours and others. In terms of empathy, understanding culture, background, accepting and respecting differences, and especially asking questions. And sometimes we tend to like assume a lot of things, right? Assume where these people are coming from, what their intentions are. So the idea of otherness here is to actually ask more questions to understand people. In creative problem solving, there are a bunch of different approaches that we might have. We are going to deep dive into some of those, but mediation, reconfiguring relationships, using sense of humor, for example, are strategies to deal with conflict. There are basically 5 approaches that we might use when dealing with conflict. The first one is collaborating, right? It's kind of like come together to think about a solution. It requires open mind and rising above personal emotions. The second one is compromising. This is coming to a middle path. Both people kind of lose, but the idea is that people lose equally, right? So both parties decide to give up something to reach a solution. Avoiding, this is when you avoid the conflict. In the example we just gave, you're in a job interview, you really want this job. It might not be the perfect timing to actually address the comment someone made, so you might decide to avoid it for a while, right? And then coming back to it after you get the offer, for example. Just an example how you could deal with this, right? Forcing is when someone with authority kind of resolves the issue. They come and they kind of address it and they decide how to proceed. And accommodation is when one party takes charge and smooth the situation. So you kind of like, forget it, let's move on. You kind of play down the points of disagreements, saying, oh, it doesn't matter. And this can be a kind of lose-lose or win-win situation, right? Depending on how much this person who's accommodating is kind of, um, I don't know, giving up on their own beliefs and stuff. So again, let's try to apply those approaches to that case, right, that we had before. I'm gonna ask you to use the annotation feature here in the Zoom. So you just click on the upper bar there. There's an annotate feature. You click there, and you click stamp. And then you can kind of like mark here what is the strategy you would use, right? And again, we are not judging anyone. The idea here is to just give you a little bit of time to interact and show what you would do. So in a job interview, for example, you really want this job. Again, the same situation, right? Let's suppose it's only you two there, you and the interviewer. This interviewer makes a comment that is directed at the group you're part of. So what is the strategy you would use in this case here? I'm gonna give you a couple of minutes. I'm just gonna grab some water. Cool. Have someone who would compromise, right? So you kind of, it doesn't matter. Let's move on. You may come back to it later, and you have someone who would avoid it, right? Oh, forget it. I'm not gonna go into it right now. It's not the place, not the time. Also, if anyone wants to talk why they picked those things, it would be pretty cool. Right, so just to say there are different approaches we could use, right? There's not a right or wrong. And the idea of this framework is kind of, so Stefano can't choose, but he would collaborate, right? So he would try to come up with a workable solution right there, which is pretty cool as well. Someone else would avoid, interesting. Someone would compromise. So yeah, just to come back to that idea, right? There is not a right or wrong. And they're going to show you some sort of different factors that you could take into consideration before thinking about how to react. It's obvious that in a moment like this, you're not expecting to have to deal with the situation, right? So the surprise factor obviously matters very much in how you're going to react to it. So compromising and avoiding are very the most popular ones, right? Which is very interesting, actually. So here you have kind of a framework, consultants love framework. So, so when you should collaborate, right? When you need to achieve consensus and commitment of both parties, when you need to, just a second, let me just clear those things. Cool. Or when you need to address the interests of multiple stakeholders, right? When you have a high level of trust. So in this case, we don't know if you met the interviewer before. Maybe you were friends in high school. I don't know. So maybe depending on the relationship you have with them, you might choose a path or another, right? Or when a long-term relationship is very important. So for example, if this person is going to be your boss, maybe you want to address it so it doesn't happen again in the future. Or when you don't want to take full responsibility for the decision, right? So you try to collaborate to come to a middle ground. Compromising when your goals are not that important. So you might feel that the comment, the joke is not that important at the time. When you use compromising as well, when you try to reach a temporary settlement, on a complex issue. So this comment might become a very complex thing, right? So you might compromise at that moment, or when you use it when this is a first step, when the parties don't know each other very well. So if you haven't met the interviewer, you might compromise. Avoiding when the issue is trivial and not worth the effort. So for some of you at that moment, it might not be worth the effort. When you don't have time to deal with it, maybe you only have 30 minutes of interview and you want to focus on your skills rather than this issue. When it's not the right time or place, when you need time to think, calm down, or collect the information. So sometimes we are kind of caught by surprise, right? And we would like to kind of like think about how we would react. Forcing is when other methods don't work. So you might end up forcing and saying, oh, for example, if you are the only available candidate for this and the company really wants to hire you, you might try to force here, right? This is useful when there is this difference in power. So it's usually the times you force. When you require a quick resolution, for example, or accommodating, right? When the issue is not as important, when you accept that you're wrong, for example, when you have no choice, or when continued conflict would be detrimental. So these are mainly the reasons why you would accommodate. So the idea here is to kind of provide you a basic framework on how to approach each of those decisions, right? And again, kind of remembering these things are kind of important for you to go through a conflict and trying to extract the most positive aspects of it. We're going to deep dive into some of those topics in a second, but the idea here is to give you an initial idea of how you could approach these situations, right? Here is another example. In the interest of time, I think I'm going to skip this one, but just so you can think about this later, which approach would you use? So you're in a happy hour with your team. In front of everyone, a colleague makes an inappropriate remark regarding gender, race, or sexual identity. So this is kind of a homework for you, but which approach would you use in this case as well? And kind of like go back to the previous slide. I think we're going to send the material to you, but kind of go back to the previous slide to kind of think about all of those criteria that you might use to address this. So talking a little bit about nonviolent communication, this is an additional tool, right? This is the idea here is to actually provide you with a little bit of introspection maybe on the role of conflict in our lives and in society and what it means for us. So the idea here is to reframe it, right? To reframe conflict as something that is more related to a need that is not being addressed rather than an unpleasant situation or an aggression, for example. So the nonviolent communication assumes that this is all based on a book. It's called Nonviolent Communications. It's from 1960. It's a pretty good book. I highly recommend it. So this theory kind of assumes all human beings are compassionate and highly empathetic. People only resort to conflict, violence, or harmful behavior when they do not recognize that their needs are being met. And this is a different way of thinking about conflict, right? So I ask you to be kind of open-minded here. So NVC uses consciousness, communication, and language to create a framework from which you can express your feelings and needs, listen to others' feelings and needs, and facilitate outcomes that are beneficial to both parties, right? And this last point is very important. The NVC can be used to others, but we usually start it by using it with ourselves, right? And here are some sentences of the book. And living with my boyfriend during this quarantine, I have to say this was very useful for dealing with conflict here, right? So all judgments are tragic expressions of unmet needs. So this is a kind of a deep thing, right? If you think about it. NVC help us create a more peaceful state of mind by encouraging us to focus on what we are truly wanting rather than what is wrong with others or with ourselves. and I kind of go through the 4 steps here, but the asking is also very important. Self-judgments, like all judgments, are tragic expressions of unmet needs. So we're going to go through the 4 points of NVC now, and it's actually very interesting. So the idea here is to actually apply these 4 steps, right? So every single time we are in a conflict, and this might be a conflict with others, a conflict with ourselves. So the first one is observe, identify the feeling, connect with the need, and then make the request. And one idea that we should stop here is that when we use nonviolent communication, we are actually being passive, right? We are actually being, we are actually avoiding conflict and kind of excusing others for their violent behavior, but that's not the point. The point is exactly the opposite. The point is actually facilitate you making the requests, or facilitate that you get what you want. So related to observing, so that's how you start, right? So when you're in a difficult situation, observe objectively without evaluating, blaming, or judging yourself or others. Recap what someone had said, done, or what you had said, done, without the emotional component. So trying to be factual here, right? And use your senses to pick up verbal and non-verbal cues. Most importantly, practice active listening. And the idea behind practice active listening, and this is something that you can practice, is that you're actually getting everything that the other person is saying, right? And you're trying actually to stay on your side of the course without assuming people want what people want or people want to say, but actually listening in like a level 1, level 2, and level 3 level, right? And the idea is actually to actually pay attention to what the other person is saying. And when we are actually listening on this step, we are actually the idea is to actually try to avoid all of those behaviors that keep us from listening, right? So sometimes someone is telling us something to us, and you're thinking about what you're going to say to comfort them, or to interrogate them, or to educate them, or to sympathize with them. And the idea is to kind of block all of those behaviors at this moment. And what are the things that actually help us to actively listening, right? The first one is paraphrasing. And that means what I'm hearing you say is blah, 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 blah. And the person is going to confirm, or they are going to deny and explain to you what they're actually saying. Asking questions to guide the conversation, and what did he say, for example, and practicing, right? So practicing active listening is very important. We could have a whole hour about active listening with practices and stuff, but just keep in mind that we might be actually lacking some of those skills, and this is source of a lot of unproductive conflict as well. The second point is identify the feeling, right? And here it might be your feeling or the other person's feeling. It actually starts with that. We usually start with ours, right? And how you're actually feeling with a conflict, with an undesirable situation. And here there's something that might sound ridiculous, which is a wheel of feelings with all possible feelings that you might have. The stronger ones are in the middle, the lighter ones are in the borders. My own experience, this was shown to be very productive when you're in a conflict situation, right? Sometimes you don't know exactly what you're thinking, what you're feeling. The idea is to stop and think about it for a second. The third step is connecting this feeling with a need, right? So what is happening, and how we are feeling as a result of needs that are not being met. So for example, sustenance, trust, understanding, all of those needs might actually impact the way that we are feeling. And the idea behind nonviolent communication is actually deep dive into this point here, and understand what are the needs that are not being met. So connect the observation from the start with the feeling, and then with the need, and then state your need and try to guess what the other, or try to guess what the other person needs, right? So here we have some examples, right? So if you have, for example, for example, you're in a, I don't know, feedback situation, I don't know, and the person's pointing a lot of weaknesses, right, and not bringing up your strengths, and you feel very disappointed, then sad and angry at that. So what might be the need before all of that? And that might be a need of recognition, for example, right? So the idea here of this third step is to actually connect it with a need. And the fourth step, which is the most important one, it's the goal here is to make the request, right? To ask the person what you actually want. The idea here is to be very clear and very specific. And someone once gave me a very good advice, which was ask. And that was the advice: ask for what you want. And it was very important. So avoid saying what you don't want. Try say what you want. The goal is to attempt to motivate the person out of willingness and compassionate giving instead of fear, guilt, shame, and everything. So ask for what you want, what you need. And again, it's a request, not a demand. You're not asking the person to, you're not demanding the person to do something, right? Here we have another example of how you can apply all of this, right? So we have a meeting. This is not a diversity related example, it's just to kind of apply it. So we schedule a meeting to discuss something very important. Your colleague arrives late every single time, right? So what your natural reaction to this is to say you arrived late. That's very disrespectful. So what NVC says is that you could kind of reframe this um, to observe, identify the feeling, connect it with the need, and then make the final request. So instead of saying you arrived late, say when you arrived 10 minutes late to a meeting we scheduled together, and this is a factual observation, right? Identify the feeling, and this kind of comes back to that idea we brought on the beginning about identifying feelings. Um, and emotional intelligence and everything. So kind of like use that to kind of come to this, right? So when you arrive 10 minutes late, I feel disrespected. So this is the feeling that you have. And what is the need behind it, right? As being punctual shows me that you're committed to our meeting, right? So the need here is actually this commitment. And finally, make the request. In the future, could you make sure to arrive on time? So again, you can kind of see how different it is, right? From accusing the person of being late and saying they are just disrespecting you, to saying that you feel disrespected. So the idea here is to actually, um, I don't know, apply this to situations. And how do you turn this into a practice, right? Something that you can use every single day in your life. So first you start with yourself, right? And then you apply it to others. So the idea here is to practice non-violent communication with ourselves. And what do we mean by this? Is to be more forgiving, right? To be more accepting of our feelings and our needs, and to learn how to recognize them. So instead of saying the other person made me angry, you're in this case, you're kind of letting other people's kind of affect your well-being. You turn this sentence around and think, when I see them do X, I feel angry because I have a need of respect, for example. So the idea here is to kind of shift this around so you have control over your own feelings. And then you can apply it to others, right? So practice with strangers that are going to be less judgmental. Practice with people very close to you. You can even say to them, well, I'm trying to kind of like practice some nonviolent communication here. What do you think? And then bring it to work, right? To work situations where you feel conflict might be an issue. So here is an example. I don't know if I have time for this. I'm not sure. I don't think so. So in your team event with your colleagues, for example, someone you consider a friend, who you know is an ally, makes a comment that reinforces a negative stereotype, for example. So how could we apply nonviolent communication to this? So first observe, right? When you say whatever the person said, identify the feeling, how this made you feel, and you might say it. You might connect it with a need. What is the need behind it, right? And then make the request. In the future, can you please not make these kinds of comments anymore. So the idea here is to apply this nonviolent communication to our day-to-day interactions and to situations that we underrepresented people and underrepresented members, we as people of underrepresented groups might actually face, right? And here, just to finish this, I'm going to open for questions in a second, but 10 practical tips, right, on how to deal with conflict. So one, name your emotions before meeting with the other person. Sometimes you're caught by surprise. You don't have time to name your emotions, but keeping this in mind, so you actually use I feel statements might be a very useful practice for conflict situations. Two, decide what is the right time to have a conversation. It's good to have some time, right? Take some time off, wait until your emotions cool off so you can make that objective observation, identify your feeling, connect it with a need, and think about the request. But don't wait too much time, right? Negative feelings may marinate and the issue might be deprioritized. The third tip is meet face-to-face. This is kind of for old normal situations, right? For a new normal, maybe use a private Zoom chat, for example. Don't enter a conversation to win. And someone once gave me a good tip as well, which was, so when you're starting kind of a debate, a conflict, the first thing you should think about is what would change for the other person to change their mind? And you might even ask that, right? So what is the information that you need that's going to make you change your mind? This is very useful for political debates specifically. But kind of keep this in mind, right? So sometimes you enter a conversation, a debate, and you're not allowing yourself to change your mind. So the idea here is to actually open the door for changing. 5, use I feel statements, again, as you said. 6, focus on behavior, not personality. So don't accuse people of being disrespectful, for example. Focus on the behavior that made you feel disrespected. 7, legitimize and echo feelings of people back to them. This is also good practice. 8, never tell someone what they did, what they said, or how they felt. This is very, it's a practice that usually brings the negative parts of conflict. Find an opportunity to admit that you are wrong, if it's the case, right? Or what you could have done better. And finally, don't forget the other resources, family, friends, company-wide, the law, and the several conflict management techniques and when and how to use them. Cool. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, we still have 5 minutes. Otherwise, thank you very much for participating. It's very great to meet you. Hope you got something useful out of this.